A lot of parents expect some financial responsibility for their children once they finish school and through the pathway to university. What's not easy to understand is their eligibility for youth allowance. What's interesting is that having a child means you cycle through the parental pay system, childcare subsidy, family tax benefit. And if your children don't have a pathway to independence under the government rules, their eligibility for youth allowance as a student or apprentice is based on the family financial situation. The family financial situation can change a lot over that period, and the various components of eligibility can change also, like the age of the children, whether some children are at school and some at university, whether families are separated, repartnered. All these factors contribute to eligibility for student allowance. The student moving away to study is eligible for a higher rate, and because of this higher rate eligibility, the income cutoff for when the family is not eligible changes. A family with one student away and two students perhaps still at school can easily have an income of up to $300,000 and still qualify for some youth allowance for the student. And what's really important with youth allowance is it also comes with associated entitlements, such as a healthcare card, which gives better Medicare, pharmaceutical, transport concessions, and more. There's about 170,000 recipients of youth allowance, and I'd say it's probably about 1 in 4 university students gets the youth allowance. A student living at home is eligible for about $12,500 a year worth of youth allowance. A student away from home, the number is more like $18,000 a year. And on top of that can be rent assistance, taking the total support of around $23,300 a year. Now, for the student receiving youth allowance, their income interacts with their youth allowance eligibility in quite a complicated way. And also, youth allowance is a taxable payment. So if students earn money in addition to their youth allowance, forecasting tax is tricky, could result in surprises. So there's a number of things to go through, not just in the eligibility for youth allowance, which has certain carve-outs for regional students and remote students, but also the way it interacts with student earnings over time and tax. Now, one other area that I think is overlooked by students in the rush to sign up for their course is the cost of the course. The cost of the course is politically driven, with some courses costing a lot less than others. Now, this might not seem much of a story right now, but that debt is indexed over time. There's quite a specific way that it is repaid. And I think finding out student debt is not as straightforward as it could be. I think clarifying your existing student debt position could be easier. And as someone who looks carefully at family cash flows, it's really interesting to look at the impact of student debt on family cash flows as someone's earnings might get to a level where their repayment of student debt really starts to kick in. This can impact their household cash flows and their ability to pay household costs, particularly with children. Banks also take into account student debt when looking at their ability to lend money. So if you're going to simply clear student debt, that's great. But the student debt can be a story in someone's financial life for a long time after university finishes also. The Entitlemate app approaches the youth allowance in two different ways, one from the perspective of the student and one from the perspective of the family with a student in it, which I'm going to demonstrate. I think what's really interesting about student debt is that the student really needs to have a sense of the parent's financial situation, which is probably not something that's often shared. I think it's absolutely reasonable that a student and their family can pinpoint with complete accuracy exactly where they stand in the system and how their actions can impact their eligibility for payment and associated concessions. As someone with student-age children myself, there's a whole lot of this that I just did not understand until doing the work. Understanding exactly where you stand will help you make the right decisions and will help you understand clearly the impact of any actions. And first up, I'd like to say this is a mobile-first app. Everything's designed to work beautifully on a mobile, but it formats really nicely on a desktop, and we've got more screen real estate to demonstrate the app here. But let's get going. We're going to give a scenario here. We're not going to give any identification or tax file numbers or bank accounts, just literally a scenario. So let's test the scenario of Brendan, who is a young student born in 2007. So I'm 19 years old. I am a student and I'm studying full time and I'm living away from home. And let's say I'm living at Melbourne University. And so what this app's going to tell me is the potential for youth allowance and the associated healthcare card and Medicare and PBS outcomes. So let's get started. Immediately, the estimated maximum rate of youth allowance for me in this situation is $684 a week. I can easily toggle if I want to consider that as a fortnightly or weekly amount. The system is now waiting for me to put in my rental situation to determine my eligibility for rental assistance. I'm going to say in this case, oh, by the way, there's a different calculation for whether you're renting alone, you're sharing, or you're in a university college, and all the numbers are accounted for in the app. Let's say I'm sharing and I'm paying $300 a week. What I can see here is I'm well and truly in the zone to qualify for the maximum amount of rent assistance. And so I'm going to save that to my profile. And then the next thing that we're waiting for is the income of my parents. So it's defaulted here to $140,000, but let's test this out. Just say I'm the eldest of three and there are two kids at home. I want to make it really clear also that if your parents are separated, you can choose the parent with the lowest income here. So it's not the combined income of your parents, it's the income of the parent that you live with or don't live with if you're away from university. So say if there was two other dependents at home, i.e. children of school age, and you can see that the actual cut-off rate of income for a payment to still be eligible is more than 300,000. So let's just say there's I've got a younger brother at home, and mum and dad are earning 220,000. I'm eligible for $250 a fortnight in rent assistance. In youth allowance plus rent assistance. So that's kind of the starting point here. Now there's other components here that can influence your whether you qualify as an independent. That's all covered in this calculation of the base rate. If you are 22, you automatically qualify for the full rate. There are pathways based on whether you're regional or remote or metro city. And if you are regional, there's information about the relocation scholarship that you can apply for, and the tertiary access payment. In this case, I'm a city person. I might have qualified for what's called an independence pathway by working an average of 30 hours a week for the 18-month period prior to going to university. That's something that was a complete surprise to me. So there are a number of pathways. There's all the information in the app to discover them. Specific pathways around regional students are obviously worth a close look. And so I'm eligible for a $250 payment, youth allowance and rent assistance. So what are the next things I need to know? Well, I qualify for a healthcare card, which comes automatically getting youth allowance. And that gives me access to a lower Medicare safety net, which means I can spend a lower amount of money before the government comes in to help with out-of-pocket costs. I've got the concessional PBS safety net, which is also really important for minimising my out-of-pockets for pharmaceuticals. Probably a young student probably not as reliant on the health system, but it's worthwhile having some support. There are other concessions associated with having a healthcare card. So if I was in a share accommodation, if I had the electricity in my name, I could get a discount on electricity, get gas concessions, There's a whole range of other concessions that are associated with having a healthcare card, including free ambulance, I think, which is good to know, and 50% off public transport fares if your student card is not available. So, yeah, there's a whole world that's opened up by having the healthcare card. That's a whole other component, and there's also fares allowance if you for travel costs between your permanent home and your place of tertiary study. You have to apply for these. The app tells you that it's available and worthwhile considering. I've also got a bunch of other sort of important to know components on there. But let's move on to the income story here. As someone who is in receipt of the youth allowance, if your earnings reach a limit when your youth allowance starts to get cut, and it's not that straightforward. Basically, you have an income bank balance that accumulates from when you start receiving the youth allowance that moves at $539 a fortnight, unless you're earning money in that fortnight, but it accumulates up to a maximum. So what that means is that you know that if you're earning $539 in a fortnight, the amount between that and $646 is a 50% reduction in your youth allowance, and then above that it's a 60 cents reduction. So it's quite complicated. However, just thinking I'm going to watch my earnings more than $539 a fortnight is probably the start of it. Students will likely have lumpy income. You might be able to, you might not work for a period and accumulate the whole, I think it's 13,500 worth of income bank credit. So you might get to a holiday period and then have a very busy couple of weeks and earn a bunch of money, and it will have no impact on your youth allowance. But that's something that you can manage with complete accuracy. It shouldn't be a mystery to you. You can find out where your income bank balance is via Centrelink going into a holiday period, and then you can be aware of the impact on your earnings on your youth allowance. Another thing that I think is really important is that your youth allowance is taxable, right? Your rent assistance is not taxable, but your youth allowance is taxable. So if you say we're eligible for the maximum amount of youth allowance, you'd be getting towards the threshold for having to pay tax. So once again, it's just a kind of a management story here. I do have a basic tax calculator to help there. That should be something that with a bit of time you'd get used to understanding, but there's nothing worse than a surprise at tax time. So that's kind of the basic components of youth allowance. Your eligibility is based on whether you are at home or living away. The kind of rent you pay for your accommodation varies how much rent allowance you're eligible for. The amount varies, the amount of rent allowance. The amount of the payment is reduced by your parents' income situation. As a component of that, there can be the other dependents in the picture. So you can see it's really, really complicated. But I think once you put your head down and understand it, you're ready to go. If there are overpayments, so this is what I think might be an interesting tension in terms of sharing, your family's financial situation. If your parents, for example, don't manage their income disclosure and end up being paid too much youth allowance, it can be claimed back. And you can also qualify for loans as well that can just be added to your student debt. Now, the student debt is the next story, and I think it's something that's really undercooked in terms of how much we focus on it. So let's just a quick little heads up on that. We've got an explainer here. Your course fees are based on the type of course that you're doing. Education, nursing, languages are lower cost. Law, commerce, higher cost. Okay, so but I don't think people focus a lot on the kind of debt that they accumulate during their course. I don't think people understand easily enough the cost of that debt. Now it's indexed now, and it's indexed to the lesser of inflation or wage growth. So if inflation's kind of running away, but wage growth is low, you're going to be subject to that lower index. So you'd expect it to be broadly a lower cost debt, right? So I think that's good to know. The repayment of that debt is based on your taxable earnings, and I think it's really worthwhile being quite mindful of if your income is going to start reaching levels where you're repaying a lot of your debt, and you've still got a bit to go, and that coincides with a period of your life where you might, have a family, be repaying mortgage debt. It's going to be something that is taken really seriously. So that's really worthwhile being mindful of. Any tax calculation needs to take into account repayment of student debt. And it's worthwhile knowing where you can find your balance. And it's quite straightforward to find it via MyGov and then the ATO online. There's a bit of controversy in that you have help debts taken out of your income, but it's not resolved to the end of the financial year, which is what it is, which is worth knowing about it. But, that's down the track for the repayment of fees. But I guess my focus here is that you need to go in. Not only is it perfectly reasonable to make to have clarity around your eligibility for youth allowance, but also to understand your debt position as well. So that's the youth allowance in terms of the student's perspective. And I just want to quickly show you what happens when viewing youth allowance from a broader family perspective. If you go to the website, we have these cameos, and a lot of it's based on young families. But the interesting thing about youth allowance, of course, is that if you have a child, their financial situation is tied to yours until they're 22. So this was a scenario that we put together and is a fully working version of the Entitlemate system, by the way. Tony and Sarah. Tony's lost his job, right? So he used to have a higher income. He's got Lucas, who's 22, is at home, Sienna, who's 20 at university away, and Oliver, who's 18 at school. And what's fascinating here is that the family, once now Tony's got a significantly less income, and Sarah's still working. She's earning $60,000, but keeps them well and truly below the limits to qualify for these maximum payments. So there's $35,000 worth of payments in the mix here, $7,000 of that in rent assistance. So Oliver is eligible for a family tax benefit payment. Oliver's the one in year 12. Lucas, who is 22 and living at home, qualifies for the youth allowance at the maximum rate as an independent, right? Because he's 22. And Sienna is at university, and she's got her own dashboard that's linked back to the family. So you can start to see that the complexity of the system, the payments, the tests, the thresholds, the cash flows is extraordinary. But in this case, this situation which we've got on the Entitlemate app, which you can access via the website, all for free, is a situation where Tony's lost his job. We might have been earning a higher income to put the family out of range for these payments, and so his annual income now for the current financial year, if he lost his job last year, would mean that there's a bunch of things to apply for to alleviate the financial burden of having two students in the mix and a student in year 12. So that's an introduction to the youth allowance through the lens of the broader Entitlemate project. The broader Entitlemate project is bringing together how families interact with the system with children from 0 to 22 and making it easier with a dashboard that has all the family's numbers right there. So Youth Allowance is a really interesting story. And as I said before in the introduction, we could have had a separated family, which we've got one modelled as well. And then you've got a range of other inputs. And what the whole Entitlemate project is about varying inputs over time and how you interact with the government system. So I hope that's been a good introduction to Youth Allowance. Remember, it's mobile first, and not only does it help the student determine their eligibility for Youth Allowance, it helps them manage their income in terms of how their income could affect Youth Allowance, understand the clarity around tax, because Youth Allowance is taxable, but tax isn't taken out at source, and reduce these tax surprises, and get a handle on what accumulating this student debt is going to mean over the long term. Thank you.